Good afternoon, everyone. This is a little bit of an earlier Tuesday talk today. I know the last few have been in the later evening, but I am so excited today to have my special guest, Jon Moss, who is the president of the Avon Education Association, with us. There has been certainly a lot of interest in hearing what teachers have to say, and so I'm grateful that we have this time. I know that Canton also has a president. We weren't able to make that connection right now. I am hoping maybe in the future we can have another conversation. I know that the districts are not identical, but we certainly would like to make sure that we're giving equal airtime, so to speak. So Jon, welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I think especially when you consider, we've seen Avon's blueprint, we've seen the state blueprint. I also shared the CEA PDF that had gone out, trying to give everybody as many data points as possible. And that's why I wanted to have this conversation today, is to make sure that we continue to have data points. And I have to say, with no disrespect to previous guests, this is the most questions that we've ever received. And I have a feeling that we will be getting more questions as we discuss today. I do want to just shout out all the people who have been on the reopening committee to try to get these documents together, to our wonderful superintendent, Dr. Carnamola, to our Board of Ed. We are very lucky in Avon to have all these wonderful services and people that are so committed to our children. And honestly, I feel that in the situation that we're in, it's so incredibly challenging, and it's been so hard to know what the right thing is to do, especially when the governor has just said, well, let's do a full reopen. And then yesterday that changed again. So I feel like I just want to say thank you to all of the folks and sort of give those thanks to you as the recipient of all that work, because I know that this has just been incredibly challenging, and there are sometimes no good answers.
Right. And I think that's one of the challenges right now. I was talking to a colleague about that. When you think so much about the decisions that are made in a classroom level or in a school level or in a district level, it's always done using your past experiences. We've had, this student need come up in the past. How can that guide us here? None of us have ever been in a situation like this one. So we're literally coming up with best practices for how to respond to situations like this. As we're going, as new data are coming into the district, we're figuring out what is the right thing when, like you said, there really aren't any clear right answers right now.
Right, and as I failed to mention up at the top, you've been a teacher for 17 years. This is not something I think that you could necessarily have even thought to prepare yourself for. I think so many other teachers are in that same situation. I think you have all the support staff, everybody, and so I think that we have heard from a lot. Obviously, like I said, you were on, one of the committees to help reopen the schools, but I think that there is a lot of interest in what the teachers have to say. I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I do have to refer to the many questions that we got today. I normally have them off the top of my head, but there were quite a few. So, how are teachers preparing for the upcoming year in terms of classrooms, in terms of services? I don't know if you can address say special needs or paras in addition to teachers, but that's sort of, where we can start.
Sure, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we're seeing right now is that teachers are trying to go through our normal routines to get ready for the school year in a situation that is, in fact, anything but normal. We all want to return to normality, but it's not going to have that same feel. And I think we're already feeling that as teachers right now during the summer as we're trying to make plans. This is normally the time of year when I start going into my classroom and I start getting things ready and, unboxing stuff that I had to put away during the summer for room cleanup and setting up all the displays and the tables. And this year, it's really has a different experience for teachers. I think a lot of us are going in this summer, to try to set up our classrooms in a socially distant way. We're trying hard not to make it feel sterile. We're trying hard to make it a warm and welcoming environment. Time will tell, how we can accomplish that goal. But that's one of the biggest pieces right now is teachers are going in a lot during the summer because for a lot of us that means removing extra furniture in the classroom, flexible seating options, comfy reading nooks, that sort of a situation. We're not going to have as many, shared materials. We're not going to have a morning meeting space necessarily where all the kids are going to certainly sit in a circle shoulder to shoulder. So part of it is the structural setup that we need to do to get our classrooms ready. But the other is us kind of wrapping our minds around what we think it's going to look like for us in the coming year, how we think that we're going to have to shift some of our routines. How do we greet students at the door when you're not doing a high five or a handshake? You know, that's an easier one, of course, to deal with. But it goes anywhere from that to, you know, if you're a kindergarten or first grade teacher, we all know the first couple of days of school can be awfully tough for kids, you know, saying goodbye to their parents for the next couple of hours. How does that work when these are kids that have been at home with their parents, many of them since March? They didn't finish their last year of pre-K. They may not have gone to a summer camp. And here they're going off to school. And, you know, they're younger teachers of younger students. They're wondering, okay, how am I going to help soothe a child who's in tears? They're feeling overwhelmed. They're frightened when you have to say, I'm sorry, I have to stand, you know, 3 to 6 feet away from you. I can't give you a big old hug right now.
Yeah. And that, I mean, incredibly difficult with younger children. But, you know, I think that it's sort of that concern over the cumulative stress that we have all been under for this entire time in terms of, you know, even children who maybe didn't experience anxiety, the concern over what kind of anxiety will they be bringing with them into the classroom. That, I mean, I just, as a parent, I certainly know that myself, and expressing concerns, you know, my children expressing concerns at 3 different schools about what their environments are going to be like. So I you know, part of this conversation is very personal. So I really do appreciate that. And so you know, I think that when we received the documentation and the blueprint, and I just applaud the level of thought that went into that. It was great to get sort of the checklist ahead of time, because we could digest that piece first and then the further plans. But I do have some questions now. You know, that was mostly full return. And now yesterday, the governor is saying, you know, towns can choose.
Yeah.
So how are teachers feeling, do you think, about more of a hybrid versus all in?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Yesterday, we all got a pretty big surprise when the governor and the commissioner announced that. And, you know, that's going to be a really hard question, I think, for all of us to figure out the answer to, is, as we said at the very beginning, what is the right course of action? How do we figure out how to make that work? And the governor talked about a few different options. You know, he certainly said that districts will have the autonomy to talk about whether they want to return fully in person, in a hybrid model, or fully remotely, and how that's going to be the best fit for each district. But in the same breath, they were also saying, but we think just about everyone should be able to go back. So it was a bit of a loaded comment. It was, sure, go ahead and do what's right for you, but you should probably be leaning toward this course of action. And what worries me, to be truthful with you, is, you know, the state has legislated so much about our reopening efforts for all of us. You know, when can restaurants open to serve people indoors? When can hair salons open? You know, what are the rules for wearing masks? All of these pieces which are applicable to a smaller number of people at a time. You know, how many people are in a restaurant? If you're at a lower capacity, 40, 50, depending on the size of the restaurant, oftentimes far, far, far less. And yet they're saying, oh, but opening up a school district with thousands of students, yeah, go ahead, superintendents, you know, we'll give you that one. And that, it worries me. It feels like, to be honest with you, it feels like we're playing a little bit of a game of, you know, political hot potato, you know, for who gets stuck making the decision that's inevitably going to be unpopular with so many different people. I don't know how that's going to go, but it worries me that we're throwing some of our local administrators under the bus a little bit with that one.
I absolutely agree with you. I have to tell you, when I heard that yesterday, my first thought was, oh my goodness, we just went through this entire planning process. So much thought went into it. And now you're just going to go, well, you know, if you wanted to do something different, you know, just roll the dice. It's like, whoa, 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 you know, I think that the level of thought that's gone into not just our district, but everyone's district in terms of what is the right thing, it's very significant. And I, you know, I've seen these signs and had conversations with my teacher friends and other teachers that have reached out to me. It's like, oh, we were being lauded as essential workers in the spring, and now, you know, it's like, well, just go do your job. And I don't think that's fair either. So I'm sure you're hearing some of that.
I certainly am.
Yeah, it is challenging for sure. So what supports do you think the teachers actually need to reopen? And then dovetailing on that, I don't know if you can speak to, have there been specific trainings around, you know, if we do go to a hybrid or we do go to online, has there been training in terms of making the online teaching, I don't want to say better, but obviously maybe more strategies around teaching online as compared to
More effective.
Yeah, exactly. More effective. Thank you.
Well, here, I'm going to flip-flop the order of those.
Okay.
For a second, just on the PD piece, I think that there's definitely the potential for us to do some really cool things in a remote environment and some really effective things in a remote environment. What we did last spring, that was a response to an emergency. That was, holy mackerel, you know, I think we found out, I will never forget, it was a Thursday evening. We had parent-teacher conferences at Pine Grove and Roaring Brook. And we found out, hey, tomorrow's going to be your last day for 2 weeks. And then bring whatever you need. But we thought initially it was going to be 2 weeks, and then it became, what was it, a month or two, and it became longer and longer. And so what we were planning for was constantly in flux. It was constantly changing in terms of what the goal was. Are we doing a stopgap measure just for a week or two to keep kids engaged? Okay, now we need to do some new learning. Okay, now it's been a while. We need to engage more with our kids. So to no one's fault, the expectation, the bar was always shifting. And so we had to keep refining what we were doing. And this year, I think we're able to look at it with our eyes open. We're able to plan more effectively. We're able to figure out what do teachers need in order to really be successful, and honestly, what do students need in order to be successful. You know, I know the district is moving forward very proactively with our one-to-one deployment of technology, because we know that whether we are in school or remotely, having access to technology is going to be a critical piece. And we're going to be using that in school too. We're going to be looking at ways that we can leverage some of those same resources that we will use if we're in a remote situation in the in-person place too, in order to promote social distancing. So the technology is going to play a very key role, but along with that is then the training for teachers and training for for students on how to use these new tools.
Right.
The district has added, as I'm sure you know from our Board of Ed meeting, has added 3 additional professional development days to the start of the year. So for the first time in a very long time, we're going to have 5 days before the students come back. And part of that will certainly be talking about safety measures that are in place, learning what's going to be our operational protocols. But a lot of that is going to be front-loading some of the professional development that we need for using some of the tools, whether that's making sure that everyone is really comfortable using Google Classroom and the suite of apps called G Suite, you know, Google Docs, Google Sheets, making sure that everyone's feeling really comfortable with those, but also what are the other new and innovative tools? And what's critical, because one of my other hats, I wear a bunch of them, but one of my other hats is being a technology leader in my building. And it's kind of a twofold piece. It's how do you use the tool, but it's also how to use the tool well. Because anyone can learn how to do an activity using, you know, last year, something that we used a ton, especially in the elementary level, was a system called Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle allows you to take videos, whether they're ones you've recorded or videos you found online, and share them with your students, but it allows you to ask specific questions, whether that's open-ended or whether that's multiple choice, throughout the videos to get a measure on how kids are doing. That's a really powerful tool. That was something that I used last year. I could look, post an assignment, have kids watch this video, answer some questions, and then I could look and see, okay, I need to touch base with, you know, these kids to make sure that they're feeling really comfortable with this skill. And that really helped to keep things going. We want to bring that same practice to even more teachers so that they really feel comfortable using these tools to improve student learning. So that's one big piece right there.
Well, and I think that we certainly saw it, and I mean no criticism when I say this. I only mean it in terms of our end user experience at our house. Obviously there's some teachers who hit the ground running because they were much more familiar with the tools. And it's funny when you mention Edpuzzle. Yes, we a lot of Edpuzzle at our house, with a child that was at Roaring Brook. And so, you're right. There are great tools out there. I mean, certainly I think that, even though we are in the middle of a crisis, this is also, crisis and opportunity, right? They go together. And I think that so much, this is a way to really have opportunities that maybe we didn't have before. I didn't get to dig into it today, but I did see that the governor was making an announcement about making sure that technology is being spread across the state, another investment in technology for schools. Certainly, I think we did pretty well in our district. Or some would say very well in our district, but we know that, 500 kids were basically not even in contact with schools in Hartford. We have other disparities across the state we certainly have to address. But even though we do well here, there's always things I think that we can be doing better. And that's where we improve, because now there's more time to plan than, oh my gosh, you're not going to be in school for the next 2 weeks, which turned into months.
Right.
So I really do, I'm with you. I appreciate that. And certainly it'll be interesting to see moving forward how that sort of evolves. How are teachers feeling about that return to in-person instruction? We got a lot of questions in terms of, masks, mask enforcement. How are the teachers going to enforce masks? There was something about desk shields. Does that mean if there's a desk shield that they don't have to have the mask on? Someone, I saw a bunch of questions last week. How about a face shield instead of the mask? Can they, who's enforcing it? How are they enforcing it? And how are teachers feeling about that sort of additional job that's now added in?
Right. And there are so many key pieces to that. So some of them I can answer for you.
Okay.
For example, even with the desk shields, students are going to be asked to wear their masks. That's a state directive.
That's a big one.
Absolutely.
Yep.
One thing, we're still trying to figure out how mask breaks are going to look. Some other pieces of that, I would certainly let the district answer what the plans are. But some of those questions we don't yet have answers to, and that's kind of one of those key pieces. You asked a few minutes ago, what supports do teachers need in the classroom in order to be successful? And I think one of those pieces is we need to know what those procedures are going to be, what we're going to be asked to do, so that we can then say what supports we need. We don't yet have all those answers, and to be totally fair and honest, nobody has the answers to all of these questions. But as we get, every week we're getting a little closer to that start date, and we really need to get those answers in place. I think a lot of those logistics are still being figured out. Mask breaks, when are they happening? Where are they happening? How long are we going to have them? Are they indoors or outdoors? How are we keeping everyone safe? I mentioned earlier, how do you help comfort students that are stressed or upset on the first day of school? How do we handle when there's a backlog for the school nurse? One thing that's one that I'm concerned about, because the state has outlined how there needs to be, for example, an isolation room for students where the school nurse determines they are symptomatic. And I appreciate that our district is absolutely addressing that piece. The concern that I have is I'm hearing that obviously one of the guidelines is you have to limit how many people are in the nurse's office. And the worry that I have is in the first few days of school, weeks of school even, you're going to have anyone who's got a cough, anyone who's got a runny nose, anyone who's sweating in class, even if it's because the AC is maybe on the fritz and it's feeling warm in there. Those are some of the signs. And I think we would all want our children's teachers to be really proactive. And hey, if you see someone, it goes back to that old, if you see something, say something.
Yes.
Right. And so, what worries me is you're going to have in the first, 2 hours of school, a lot of teachers that are sending students down to the nurse. And part of that is going to be us needing to calibrate what are our practices to make sure we're not overly sensitive. But part of that is also us needing to make sure that we do have a plan in place where we're not sending kids back to the classroom saying, sorry, we're not ready for them yet. And you have somebody who you're uncomfortable with what they're showing you, continuing to sit in class, coughing and
Right.
addressing, some of those concerns. Another example is lunch. That's a big piece of it. If you're having, 75, 100 kids in a lunchroom, I appreciate that the district is working on social distancing between those cohorts. I want to make sure that we're also working on just the social distancing between those kids.
Right.
'Cause obviously you have to take your masks off to be able to eat. So how do we do that in a safe way, especially because we all know elementary kids, they're going to be leaning over, talking to their friends, they're going to be
Right.
shouting across to, their classmates. That's sending particles out there. How do we make sure that we're doing it in a way that feels safe for our students or our parents? The state wouldn't allow a restaurant, that size open. We need to
Right.
make sure that we're being equally safe with our own students. We need to know what happens if school shuts down. We need to know what happens if someone's symptomatic, if they're sent home. How do we, what's our reentry plan? What happens if the testing is taking a while? What happens if people are feeling anxious about even sharing the results of testing? I think there's really an increasing concern that it's like that lice factor. You don't ever want to admit that, yeah, that's me, we tested positive. Yeah. Well, and that's a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
So that's some of the big questions that we have, and that's why I think that there's a lot of anxiety among teachers of how is this going to work when we come back, a lot of uncertainties that we all share.
So it's interesting that you mentioned all of that. I had one parent say to me, we know that unfortunately parents do send their children to school knowing they have lice, knowing they have a fever. Sometimes, people have been in a position where it's like they got to be at the office. They don't have somebody to watch a sick kid. The sick kid goes to school. In even the best of circumstances, that's challenging. But now it's like, it's also, when you're saying about like, if you see the slightest symptom in the classroom, it's also the parents asking at home, like, if if my kid's feeling a little, does that mean I shouldn't send? Or, and it was interesting when you were saying before, it's like, as the mother of 3 kids, so much of this, I can just think back to, especially when my girls were little, and it's like, we joke, they're Petri dishes, right? So it's, even though that we're seeing some positive that maybe they don't spread as much or whatever, it's still, we know the kids, when they return to school after not having been together over a summer, let alone how long we've not been together now, right. The stomach bug, the this, the that, the hand, foot, mouth, just the normal stuff that goes through.
All of those same illnesses that are always running through schools, they're not going anywhere.
No,
and so absolutely, that's going to be a big piece. And it's a little bit easier if a kid gets sent home and we can say, look, stop at your doctor's office, get a test. It'll be back in 24 hours. If it's clear, come on back.
Right.
And by the way, that's, I think, going to be a similar piece for staff members. But all of the information that we're seeing coming from, throughout the country is that the wait time for tests is increasing and increasing. And where a model works pretty well, if it's go home, get tested, come on back once you're clear, you're out for a day or two. How does that work when testing takes a week, 2 weeks to come back?
Right.
And likewise, what do you then do as a school if a student is sent home and you have no information on
right.
Whether they truly are infectious or not? I don't have that answer. That's one of the million-dollar questions, certainly.
So it's interesting. One question, why if daycares aren't requiring masks for small children and summer camp, are masks required for small cohorts at school? It's confusing that the mask mandate for small children varies. I'm not sure you necessarily have that answer. I don't think I do either. I mean,
I'm amazed that I think I do, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
So daycares, preschools, and summer camps all fall into the auspices of the Office of Early Childhood. It's a separate set of regulations from the Connecticut State Department of Education. That's obviously a legal interpretation of the difference. From a realistic standpoint, it has to do with mask tolerance. Those younger kids, it is going to be incredibly, incredibly difficult for them to be able to wear those masks. Mm-hmm. We recognize the value, and I think if they were able to tolerate it at 3 years, 4 years of age, then we'd say, yeah, of course, science would say they should be putting on masks also, but it's weighing the feasibility and also that impact that it's going to have on kids. To the person who asked that question, to their point, I think that question doesn't stop once it's, oh, now you're in kindergarten. That's the public school, different set of regs. We're not worried about that. That's not the case. That's still a concern, I think, that we have. And especially for me as an elementary school teacher and for my colleagues, both at Pine Grove and Roaring Brook, it's that question of, okay, how do we make sure that we're supporting those students? How do we make sure that those kids that are keeping their masks on but are tugging at it, have them hanging off the ear? You've probably seen the same memes that I've seen of the different ways to wear a mask,
Yes.
Put it on your chin, put it over your eyes, hang it from your ear like an earring. How do we support those kids? Help them to be able to wear masks because, and I'll be very, very explicit, they need to wear masks in the classroom. It's not a do the best you can. It is masks need to be worn. That's a clear directive from the state. It's a clear directive from our town. Masks are expected in the classroom setting. There will be mask breaks. I don't know how that's going to work, but beyond those, masks need to be on. And so the question is, how do we handle those? And again, those are some of those questions that we're still trying to find the answers to, of what are going to be those protocols for those situations. For example, the way you would handle a student who is refusing to wear a mask is very difficult, very different from a student who is they're trying to be cooperative, but hey, they're a young kid and it's bothering them. They're covered in whatever gunk and stuff inside the mask that they've been dripping all day. How do we handle supporting those students in a way that is encouraging to them and not punitive, but also making sure that we're keeping our students and our teachers safe? How do we find that balance? And those are those logistical pieces that we're really going to have to figure out before school starts. I find myself saying quite constantly nowadays, the devil's in the details. And I think it's never been more true than it has been this summer.
I think that's absolutely possible. And then, I also think it's, speaking about the masks, because I've done, as much research as everybody else, and maybe even more so. And I have friends who work for Department of Public Health. I have friends who are epidemiologists. I have friends who are physicians. It's critical that those masks are being taken off and on with clean hands. And that I think even some recommendations in terms of how many masks should you have a day in terms of a cloth mask or a surgical mask. There's a lot of information out there that once a mask gets wet, it's not as good as if it, was a dry mask, but how many, if you see this all day long with a small child, that's, it's a problem. So there, like you said, the devil really is in the details on that. And I think especially talking about children who may have difficulty keeping the masks on, whether it's for sensory reasons or other reasons, I have a definite concern about all of the special ed pieces of this in terms of, speech, or children who need PT, or, does the 504 follow you home? Does the IEP follow you home? What are the, I think that those are real concerns that so many people have, because there are so many children who do have those plans or have sensory issues. And so if you can speak to any of that as well, I think that there's a lot of parents have contacted me in regards to those issues.
And not to be a broken record, but that's one of those pieces we're still waiting to get guidance on also, and answers on. How is that going to work for speech and language? How do you, are the kids going down to the speech and language office, or is the teacher pushing in? Are we doing that remotely? Same with, how do you do physical therapy in a remote sense? How do you, do you find ways to do that in a safe manner in close proximity? I think those are the pieces that the district is going to work to figure out. But as curious as you are, and as people in the community are, those are questions that teachers are really curious about also, because that helps us to also plan what we're going to do in the classroom. Those pieces affect things like the effectiveness of cohorts in a classroom. The more you have people coming and going, how do we maintain that cohort piece as well?
Well, and I think that that's where, for anybody who missed it, because I did notice online today in a couple of the groups, people said, oh, I haven't seen anything about a survey. There is a survey that was sent out last week. Make sure you're checking junk mail from the district saying, we'd like you to let us know by August 3rd if you plan on sending your child back, or if you're planning on being online, what is the plan? And there's some requirements around that. Obviously, we will repost again the information both for Canton that was sent out in the last few days here, and then the information that was sent out for Avon, we'll post that in the comments of this video for anybody who's missed any of the information. We want to make sure that we're directing people to where to find it, because it is so important. And I think that sort of leads to the next thing. That has to be filled out, because you don't even know yet how many kids are actually returning. So it's hard to say what a cohort is or what it's going to look like, because there's a lot of people saying, well, how many kids are in the classroom? Well, can't really answer that till we know how many are returning. So,
and that's also then impacting what our staffing pieces are going to look like. Because one of the things that teachers throughout the state, and I'm sure throughout the country, are looking at is what's a safe way for them to return also. And so as we start to learn more about who's going to be an in-person learner and who's going to be a remote learner, I'm sure that that's going to enable school districts to start to figure out how can we accommodate teachers that are coming to them saying, I have, concerns about my own safety in returning, whether I'm at risk due to age or due to a health condition, or I have somebody in my home who has a considerable health condition. How do we accommodate those teachers as well? So all of those pieces are all, we need to know about students in order to know about teachers. We need to know about the details of reopening in order to figure out the student piece. So everything's intertwined in that regard.
So knowing that the date right now is August 31st for reopening, that there will be those, days of professional development ahead of that, knowing that the deadline is Monday to get in, are you returning or not? And if you already know, certainly fill it out as soon as you can, so that way the information is getting back. Some people I know want to take the rest of the week to figure that out.
Sure.
Is there a timeline in terms of the question that we had received was, what is the timeline for the district announcement for the back to school plans? Like more of the detailed meat, that we're talking about here. Is there a set date yet for that, or?
I don't know that there is, and I certainly wouldn't want to speak out of turn for what the district's timeline is. Okay. I know that at the Board of Education meeting, it did come up that there was a question of when will those school-specific plans be coming out, and will they be coming out in time for families to review those and then to complete the return to school survey. And I know that that's the goal of the district, but I also know things are changing every single day, just at the state level, certainly. So I don't know what the district's timeline is on that. I know that they're working hard on it, though.
Yeah. Well, and certainly, we're looking at data, and, luckily we're experiencing a different summer than some places in the country are right now. So, in some ways it was really good the way things, even though it was difficult and challenging for small businesses and challenging for schools and families and basically anyone and everyone, it does seem that there was some impact by having that shutdown. So it's something that we're all grateful that we are in a better position right now. So I think that we sort of touched on the social emotional needs, a little bit, but, how, I guess as parents, do you have suggestions for us, how we can be supporting at home? And then, what are you hearing in terms of how you're going to try to do that in a distance manner in the classroom?
Right. So I'll answer those to separate pieces. In terms of suggestions for parents, I always defer to the folks that are really the most knowledgeable, are phenomenal school psychologists, school social workers, guidance counselors. It amazes me whenever there's, regrettably, whether it's a tragedy or whether it's a world event, how immediately they can come up with suggestions and guidelines for teachers in the classrooms. They are really phenomenal professionals. And I know that a lot of our building principals sent out recommendations last spring about how to talk to your children about COVID. But one suggestion that I would always have that I use with my own children, so I'm speaking now as a parent, also is to say it's so important that we're validating kids' concerns. I think as parents, we have so many things that are on our plate, so many things that are worrying us right now. It can be really easy to just want to, it's fine, don't worry about it. And maybe obviously not in such a, ridiculous, callous way as what I'm describing, but it can be really easy for us to try and assuage kids of their concerns and alleviate the worries that they have. And the reality is we have probably many of the same fears that our kids have. Right. And so we want to make sure that we're respecting that. I'm obviously not suggesting that we should be feeding into concerns and planting concerns in kids' heads, but we want to validate what kids are saying. We want to try and have that open and direct conversation with the kids. Let's hear what's on their minds. Let's hear what they're wondering about. Let's see if we can get answers. You know, you're describing to me about a lot of the questions that we're hearing from adults in our community, but I'm sure our kids have questions too. And I think now's a great time to ask your children, what do you think school's going to look like next year? What questions do you have about what school's going to look like next year, or just about school in general in the coming year? And I think that's a chance to start to have some conversations. You know, the reality is we all want to get back to normal. We all want to have our traditional school, you know, experience with the kids, but we also need to make sure that our kids are understanding school isn't going to look and feel like what it normally does. And I think the more we can start to help kids to get that impression and get the understanding that, no, I'm not going in expecting to see a particular outcome, I think that that's a really important piece. And that's going to be a big help to us addressing kids' social, emotional, you know, needs as we're getting into the fall. But I think the other piece is we have to consider all the social, emotional aspects that go with in-person schooling. There's certainly the good part about seeing the teachers and seeing their classmates and being able to go outside together and all of those laudable pieces. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we need to also recognize that there are going to be challenges that are going to go with that. The challenge of, you know, being in your seat, the challenge of wearing your masks for an extended period of time, about not being able to play, you know, your traditional games of tag or whatnot at recess. Whether music class or art class are going to have that same feel. You know, how's it going to work, you know, when your teacher is trying to show you something, but they can't get too close to you. We need to prepare kids for some of those challenges, for the challenges of when, you know, if school or their classroom even goes remote, comes back, okay, then another classroom goes remote, and then comes back, school closes, school opens. Those are really big changes to a student's routine. And that could be a tough piece for kids to get used to. You know, we think about what it's like as teachers who joke about the first day back from a vacation as, okay, we're getting back into school mode. We have the potential to see transitions like that repeatedly during the school year. You know, separation anxiety, I know I mentioned that piece before. Long-term mask wearing where maybe they haven't had that experience to really build up to wearing a mask off and on throughout the entire day is going to be a challenging piece. I'll be honest with you, one of the concerns that I have is we talk about how, you know, kids, they want to do the right thing. They want to be kind. Kids are kind by their very nature, and that's the wonderful part for me about being a fourth grade teacher. We're talking about the concerns about what if they're at home, what if they're apart from their kids, their friends rather. The concern that I have, truthfully, about my own children, who are also elementary aged, is the impact that they would have, the impact on them if there is an outbreak, heaven forbid, and they're exposed or even get infected, and there's word that it spreads, and the kids have this guilt. I've heard it dubbed contagion guilt, of if they feel like they've spread it to somebody else, spread it to a loved one, spread it to their teacher, and especially if somebody were to get really sick in the course of it, that's going to have an impact on that social, emotional piece as well. And I'm trying to, as a parent, think about, okay, how do I prepare my children saying you're not doing anything wrong, but at the same time knowing that would be so impactful on them.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't think, you know, you can't compare that to lice, you know what I mean?
Right.
There's no comparison. As you're talking, and certainly, you know, because I have a college age student, I have a high school student, and I have an elementary age student, you know, we focus a lot on the little ones for sure. And I still consider my, you know, rising fifth grader a little one in some aspects. Easy to do that with the other one being 19. But I do think that we have to be, you know, we had done a quarantine fatigue Tuesday talk with a child psychologist early on. You know, it's important for us to really be focusing on middle schoolers, high schoolers, you know, what their social emotional learning is looking like. And, you know, and again, our children that have, you know, maybe intellectual disabilities or, you know, that have sensory issues or whatever it might be, because in some way, everyone is processing this, you know, we're all in the same storm. We're not all in the same boat. I do think that we have to the extent that we can, like you said, keep having these conversations, because I think that, depending on how much news they're consuming or social media they're consuming as they get older, it's very challenging when they see, friends out and about not wearing masks, living their lives, YOLO. And then you've got, other people who, it's the challenge of parenting that since the dawn of time, well, Johnny's rules are Johnny's rules and our rules are our rules. And, but I do think that it just is across the board. I think that the advice you gave is good advice for, any age, frankly, in that trying to keep these conversations going. And I think that, I know there are a lot of parents who are sending emails to our superintendent, Dr. Carnamola. And I think that, before you hit send on that, you might want to ask your kids what they're thinking about, because they may have a question that, frankly, you haven't thought of. And I think that there is thankfully an openness in the district in terms of, willingness to keep having these conversations. I'm so grateful for that. There was another question: will there be any extra counseling available to students who have anxiety about COVID and the return to school, etc.?
That's a terrific question. I don't know of us having additional staff that are available for that. But what I do know is, and this is true for truly every teacher, not even every teacher, every staff member in the district. Whether you're certified or in another capacities, we'll do what we need to do to meet the needs of the kids. And of course, we want to do that safely. We want to make sure that we're doing that in a responsible way. But in terms of kids and their emotional support, if they need it, we're going to make sure that they get it. If there's a child who needs to check in with a guidance counselor, a school psychologist, social worker, that's going to be a key piece. Teachers, we can always talk with the kids as well. So we'll make available what's needed, and I'm sure I speak for any teacher when I say reach out if there's a concern, and we can always put a child in connection with one of those professionals in the building if it's something beyond what we can help the child with.
Okay. And I did see that there are some rallies this week in terms of the larger Connecticut Education Association. Is there a way that beyond teachers that we can support those, or?
Absolutely. So there's a rally that's coming up on Thursday, and it's going to be, there are different locations around the entire state. And if you go to the website, cea.org, you can get some additional information on the rally that's being organized. And that rally is really focusing on the idea that we need clear, definitive leadership coming from the state to make sure that health and safety are coming first. Not just promises, but we need specific actions to ensure that we are focusing on a safe return to school. And we certainly welcome anybody from the community to join us in a lot of those efforts.
That's phenomenal. I have to say that, my own experiences with teachers from the time I was a little girl, I think about, every boo-boo that was, kissed, or the way we were comforted as children. And I think about, I can get weepy just talking about so many teachers that my children have had. Even sometimes when the college student reports how our professor is, it gets me a little emotional. And so I just hope that everyone is remembering that, these are very challenging times in terms of what you guys are going through, what our support staff, administrators, whatever it is, in any way that we can support you, we support you, you support us. That's the most critical thing for sure. I really, truly appreciate all the effort that has gone into just even the thinking about all of this. But like you said, leadership is important. I would also encourage parents. There was sort of a meme going around, and it was 3 separate memes. I support you in sending your child to school. I support you in that you want your child to have a hybrid model, and I support you in that you've decided to keep your child at home. So I hope that parent to parent, that we are all spending some time just, different rules for different families, because as you said, it's kind of the same for teachers. Like if they have an older spouse, or if they themselves have an underlying condition, or if they have someone else in their home with an underlying condition, it's the same for kids. You just don't know what's going on in people's houses, and what precautions they personally feel are necessary for, to take for their family and their decisions. And that extends to your favorite teacher who may decide that they're not able to teach in person.
I think that's the key piece, because everyone's coming in from a different background, a different consideration. We have a very large percentage of teachers that have a lot of worries about coming back to school in the fall and whether it's safe for them to return. And I'm hoping that the community is going to be understanding when there are teachers who maybe aren't comfortable doing certain things that other teachers are doing, or some teachers are teaching remotely. I'm hopeful that the district is going to be able to accommodate the teachers that are putting in those requests, to make sure that they're taking care of their own staff, to make sure that our teachers are staying safe, so that when this crisis is beyond us, those teachers can get right back into the classroom and keep doing the job that they love to do with our students.
Not just a job, it's a calling for sure. And I'm gonna, one last question, and then we will log off, because I promised you no more than 45 minutes.
My time is your time.
I appreciate that. Can you speak about, if a parent chooses remote learning, what that might look like, or is that unknown at this point?
That's the $1,000,000 question. I think I've had maybe $5 million worth of questions.
Just on that piece.
Right. So we'll add another one. That is a key question. I know yesterday in the press briefing, the governor talked about the idea of having kids remote in. He described in some districts that they've got trackers the teachers are going to wear, and an iPad that's going to follow you around to broadcast that. We don't know exactly how this is going to work, the idea of what to do for the parents that opt for a remote option. We don't know exactly how that's going to work. I'm sure that it's going to be different based on which grade level you're in. But one of the things that our association feels very strongly about is that we don't support the practice of simultaneously teaching in person and remote students while the teacher is in the classroom. That's something that's a key piece for us, primarily because we don't think it's in the best interests of students. If you ask any of the kids, the way the teachers taught remotely last year versus the way teachers teach when we're in person looks so very different. Even with the best preparations, the best new professional development, it can and it must look different. You have totally different instructional modalities. And so the fear that we have is that when you're teaching in person and you're teaching remote at the same time, you're doing neither of them well, and you're not doing a good service to our students. And there are other pieces that come with that. What about when tech issues arise and a kid's having a hard time connecting? How do you accommodate them? How do you handle it if the room has to be cleared out because a student, in the younger grades is having a hard time? What do you do with the kids that are still in there remotely? What happens when the classroom goes outside to do some outdoor teaching, which the district is really trying to maximize, and I appreciate that. I went out to Pine Grove over the weekend to try and get access to our outdoor classroom that we haven't used in some time, but here's our chance to bring it back. What happens when we go outside for those remote students when we're doing lessons? The expense of that equipment is going to be a big piece too. These are all pieces that we're going to have to figure out as time goes on. But our position is that that's not in the best interests of students, whether it's the ones that are in person or the ones remote. So what we're really advocating for is that we assign students whose families choose to go remote, we assign them to teachers that are teaching remotely or teachers that are working with a group of students remotely. That's, I think, the best way that we can maximize and meet everyone's needs. That way the remote teachers are really focusing on getting the needs of their students, and that way also we're able to accommodate teachers who need that support in order to be safe and healthy.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, I so appreciate this, Jon. I really do. We're going to give as much information, like I said, as we can in the comments after this. It will be pinned to the top of the page. So anybody who didn't get a chance to see it, they have, time. We also, we wanted to make sure that everybody knows previous Tuesday talks. We've talked to Comptroller Kevin Lembo and our State Treasurer Sean Wooden, as I mentioned, a child psychologist, about family quarantine fatigue. We have had Congresswoman Jahana Hayes And so if anybody missed any of those previous conversations, all interesting for different reasons, those are available on our website, teameleni.com, and on our YouTube channel as well. So, and eventually we will get this talk up there also. But I just, again, want to thank you for your time. I think that, again, it's another data point for people as they are headed towards August 3rd to think about some of the things that we talked about today. I think it's the big takeaway, or one of the big takeaways is, yes, masks are required even if you had a shield. And so figuring out the other sort of aspects of launch and safety and those sorts of things. But it's, a lot of it is stay tuned. And I know that as soon as decisions are made, we will be, made aware of those.
Absolutely.
So thank you again. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and someday I'll meet you in person.
I look forward to it. Someday when we can all get together.
That would be fantastic. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Jon.
Sure
Thanks
thing.
everybody
Thank
for
you.
your questions. Have a great day.